This video is for AFDA Unit 5, Lesson number 1, and we are going to be solving quadratic equations by factoring. Now, last unit we looked at factoring quadratic expressions, and now we're going to take it a step further. Instead of expressions, we're going to have equations, and the way we're going to solve them, as we can see there, is by factoring them. Now, a very important distinction we have to look at is, in this lesson, we're only looking at quadratics that have an x squared and an x term. All right, so when we have an x squared and an x term, first step we want to do is algebraically move all the terms, move everything over to one side. We're going to move everything over to the left. Then once we move everything over to one side, we're going to set the equation equal to 0. Then we're going to factor the polynomial, and then set each factor equal to 0. And then last but not least, we're going to solve each linear factor equation. So let's look at this first one here. X squared minus 10x equals negative 25. Now, in our normal classic algebra equations, we want to have our variables over on the left and our constants over on the right. But as we see here, we don't want that with our quadratic. So algebraically move all terms to one side. Of course, what that means is we have that negative 25 over on the right. So we're going to have to add 25. And whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other. So we add 25 on each side. And when we add that 25 over on the right, we have 0. Now, we've still got to keep with our like terms. We cannot add 25 to x squared. We cannot add 25 to 10x because they are not like terms. So we end up with x squared minus 10x plus 25. So we have x squared minus 10x plus 25 equals 0. And now we know how to find our way home from here. We have that 25, and just one last time I want to set this up. We've got 25 and negative 10. What two factors of 25 add up to equal negative 10? Well, keeping in mind that that plus 25 tells us that both of our factors are going to have the same sign, so it's going to be negative 5 and negative 5. All right, so we set the equation equal to 0. We have factored the polynomial x minus 5, that's equal to 0. All right, we have the equation here. All we did was just factor that left side there. And now we want to set each factor equal to 0. Now, this is a special case because we have a double factor. Anytime we have a double factor, we only have to set one of them equal to 0. And then it says we're going to solve the linear factor equation. So in this case, we add 5 to each side. Boom, we are done. All right, x equals 5. And it really is just that simple. Now on number 2 is already set equal to 0. So what we're going to do here is now we're going to jump down to step 3. Everything's already on one side, so we're going to factor the polynomial. And in this case, we still have to recognize, what do we have going on here? Well, we don't have ax squared bx plus c. Well, technically we do because our plus c is 0. But taking that away, all we have to do is GCF factor this. All right, factor out that x. And now step 4, we're still going to set each factor equal to 0. So our two factors here are x and x plus 2. Set each factor equal to 0. Now that x equals 0, we're done with that. But over here, that x plus 2, subtract that 2 from each side, and we get x equals negative 2. So our two answers, all right, the two numbers substituting for x that will make that equation equal to 0 are 0 and negative 2. So we can write it separately, or we can write what is known as a solution set. And when we write solution sets, we want to put our numbers in numerical order. So it's negative 2, comma 0. And when we write a solution set, we use our curly brackets. And there we have it. All right, let's continue on. So we have another one where we need to algebraically move everything to one side. So that means now we're going to subtract that 24 from both sides, which will give us x squared plus 2x minus 24, and that is equal to 0. And now I am no longer going to do our x puzzles anymore. What two factors of negative 24 add up to positive 2? That negative 24 tells us we're going to have one positive, one negative, and that plus 2 tells us that our larger factor is going to be the positive number. So it's x minus 4 and x plus 6. And then set each factor separately equal to 0. Add that 4 on each side, subtract that 6 on each side, and we get x equals 4 and x equals negative 6. And again, we can keep them separate. We can say x equals 4, x equals negative 6. Or again, we can say, as a solution set, negative 6, 4. And put it in our curly brackets. And that brings us to number 4, okay? Now, this one is written a little differently because we have A and C, and that's set equal to our B term, but we still do the same thing. We have to algebraically move all of our terms to one side. And we want to write it in our classic quadratic trinomial form, ax squared bxc. That's set equal to 0. What two factors of negative 36 will add up to positive 9? Well, we've got x minus 3 and x plus 12. All right, so hopefully you're starting to get the hang of this here. Set each factor equal to 0, add that 3, add that 3. Subtract 12, subtract 12. X equals 3, and x equals negative 12. Write our solution set here. Get a box around that. Booyaka. And there we go. Now, number 5. Go ahead and subtract that 5x from both sides. X squared minus 5x equals 0. And once again, we don't have the c term, or actually the c is equal to 0. So we can GCF this right here. And now once we get that x equals 0, we're done with that part right there. And x minus 5 also equals 0. And we write our solution set 0, 5. Very, very important when we write our solution set that we do put it in the curly brackets, because if we use regular parentheses, then that is our symbology for an ordered pair. We want to show that we're not talking about an ordered pair, we're talking about two separate values of x. All right, finally on this last one, so now we're going to have to subtract that 8x and that 9 from both sides. Giving us x squared minus 8x minus 9 equals 0. We need two factors of negative 9 that add up to negative 8, and that will be positive 1 and negative 9. Still set equal to 0. Now each factor separately equal to 0. So we get x is equal to negative 1 and x is equal to 9. All right. And now let's go ahead and get our solution set. Negative 1, 9. Get a box around that. Okay, so what we're going to do now Go ahead here and just do that left column. Well, actually, let's do one more here. Let's drop down to this 3x squared plus 2x minus 11 equals negative 3. Same thing, we still got to algebraically move everything to one side, so we're going to add that 3 on both sides. All right, so 3x squared plus 2x plus 8 equals 0. All right, so 3 times 8 gives us 24. We need two factors of 24 that are going to add up to 2. Now, I want to use what is called the slip and slide method on this one and get away from doing our factoring by grouping. So we know two factors of 24 that are going to add up to 2. All right, I need to pay attention to what I'm doing. That should be a negative 8 there. Okay. Minus 8 equals 0. So we have negative 24. What two factors of negative 24 are going to add up to positive 2? Get this back up here. And of course, that is going to give us, now I'm going to bring back the x for a particular reason here. That is going to be negative 4 and a positive 6. So now we're going to write this as x minus 4. Well, let's leave a little room there. X minus 4 and x plus 6. And with this method, what we're going to do is take this 3 and make it the denominator under each one of these factors here. And then, I guess I didn't need that space in those parentheses. That's really for the next step. All right. And then what we're going to have is x minus 4 thirds. And on our second one, we can simplify that 6 thirds into 2. So x plus 2. Now what we're going to do is on this first one, that x minus 4 thirds, we're going to take that 3, take that denominator, and move it out as the coefficient on that x, and we're going to bring down that numerator of 4 so that we have, actually, you know what? Let's back that up. We don't have to do that with this here. Since we're solving the equation and not factoring, we have x minus 4 thirds equals 0, and then x plus 2 equals 0. So now we can just add that 4 thirds, subtract that 2, x equals 4 thirds, and x equals negative 2. Okay, let's look at another one so we can go from beginning to ending in one of these that has a greater than 1 and see how we do it. So add that 3 on both sides. Set equal to 0. Didn't do that over here. Okay, set equal to 0. And now we're going to have 2 times 3 equals 6. We need two factors of 6. That 2 times 3 equals positive 6. 2 plus 3 equals positive 5. And so now, once again, what we're going to do is we're going to take those two factors at plus 2 and plus 3. So we get x plus 2, x plus 3 equals 0. And now we want to take our a and write it as the denominator under each one of our factors. Then we want to simplify each fraction and set it equal to 0. So 2 over 2, that simplifies to x plus 1. And 3 over 2, that is already simplified, x plus 3 over 2. And then we're going to subtract that 1 from each side. And we're going to subtract 3/2 from each side. And that gives us our two answers, our solution set, negative 3/2 and negative 1. Okay, so now go ahead and do the left column, those three other equations on the left column, and we will check our answers. Okay, let's take a look at the solutions here. We've got our first one. We can just do GCF over on that first one there, and we see our two answers, negative 5 and 0. And our last two there. Again, algebraically move everything over to one side. We've got two factors of negative 12. So 1 and negative 12 add up to negative 11. And once again, we write our factors there, and then bring down a, that 3, bring that down as the denominator under each one of those factors, and we take it from there. And our one at the bottom, we already have all of our terms over there on the left side set equal to 0. So then it's just a matter of factoring it once again and setting each factor separately equal to 0, and we see our two answers that we get in our solution set. And of course, we got to keep in mind, notice on all of these fractions, we keep them in fraction form. We do not convert them to decimals. Okay. Now do those other three on the right column, and we will take a look at those answers and move on from there. Okay, now let's take a look at our solutions here. We see on number 8, that's GCF, 0 and 3/2. And then our other two there, we can see the solution, and we see how we get to the answer there of negative 2/2, or negative 2/5 and 2 as our answers. All right, and so there's our video for AFDA Unit 5, Lesson Number 1, solving our quadratic equations.